Welcome to the Killer Author Club. 3 best-selling authors talking about killing, of the fictional kind, with the best thriller and suspense authors in the business. Killer conversations, killer cocktails, and killer guests, with your hosts, Kimberly Bell, Heather Gutenkopf, and Kara Ruda. This is the Killer Author Club.
Hello, and welcome to the Killer Author Club, your favorite haunt where fictional murder is encouraged, alibis are optional, and the hemlock is always in bloom. Before we officially welcome tonight's guest into the club, it's time for Killer Instinct. Jessica, no overthinking, no plotting, just answer short, sweet, and deadly.
Okay, trust your memory or trust your captor?
Oh, trust your memory.
Call for help or hear him out.
Call for help immediately.
Answer your ex's call or let it ring.
Depends who the ex is.
Your real ending or the one you wrote for yourself?
The one you wrote for yourself.
Lose your freedom or lose your certainty.
What was the other one? Lose your freedom.
Certainty.
Your certainty.
Yeah.
Ooh. Lose your freedom.
A locked cabin or an open secret?
Locked cabin.
Okay, what's scarier, being trapped or wanting to stay?
Wanting to stay.
Publish your search history or your private fantasies.
Search history.
All right, Jessica, you survived the first test, but wait until you see what we have in store for you tonight. I'm Killer Kimberly Bell.
I'm Jessica Knoll.
I'm Killer Heather Gutenkopf.
And I'm Killer Kara Ruda.
And everything that we mentioned tonight, from giveaways to bonus podcast content to future guests, can be found at killerauthorclub.com or on our social media pages. So now let's get to the killing. Heather, would you like to do the honors, please?
Yeah, I would love to. Tonight's show features a notorious killer. Jessica Knoll is the New York Times bestselling author of Bright Young Women, The Favorite Sister, and Luckiest Girl Alive, now a major motion picture from Netflix starring Mila Kunis. She has been a senior editor at Cosmopolitan and the articles editor at Self. She lives in New York City with her family. So Jessica, can you please give us your best elevator pitch? Why should readers clear space in their beach bags for HELPLESS this summer?
So HELPLESS centers on my main character, Faye Heron, and she returns to her college campus to attend the funeral of her beloved professor. And she has a run-in with a toxic ex-boyfriend. And they meet to bury the hatchet. One drink turns into a kidnapping. She wakes in his secluded Adirondacks cabin, and he will not tell her why she is there. And so as her week in captivity unfolds, she's trying to answer that for herself as a deeper mystery unfolds and kind of rewrites the past as she remembers it.
So good, so good. So readers, drop your questions into the comments and we'll be watching and try to get to as many as we can. So Kara, first of all, what are we drinking tonight?
We are drinking an Aperol margarita. Jessica, could you please tell us why you've chosen this as your drink tonight?
Ooh, well, I love tequila.
Who
I love
doesn't?
alcohol. Yeah. Very refreshing summer drink. And it's been, I don't know about where you are all located, but it's been pretty steamy in New York. So nice, cool, refreshing cocktail is what the doctor ordered.
It sounds delicious.
Yay.
How to make a Aperol spritz yummier? Add tequila.
Yeah.
I love it. Love it.
I love it. Well, cheers, everybody.
Yes, cheers.
Yeah. All right, so we created the Killer Author Club so readers could get up close and personal with their favorite thriller writers. Our upcoming lineup is stacked with killers: Noelle Ely, Lucy Foley, Charles Donley, Eric LaSalle, and many, many more. But tonight, it's all about Helpless. Here's what some of Jessica Knoll's early reviewers had to say about the book.
Yes, Oprah Daily calls it unapologetically kinky and almost diabolically twisty, all these Lee words, and adds book club will need at least 2 meetings to unpack the ending.
Yeah, and Kirkus says puts the erotic back in erotic thriller. So there's that.
So impressive. But now we want to hear from the killer herself. So, Jessica, the answer to the question we're all dying to know: who do you kill?
So I think I would kill Natalie, the main character from Yesteryear. This is a compliment because Carol Burke crafted such a deliciously hateable main character that as a new mom, it's so hard to see how she treats her kids.
Yes.
So I would kill her to save her children.
Yeah.
But I loved every word of that book. Like,
it was so well written. Yeah,
Yes.
so well, and like still living rent free in my head.
yes,
Same.
absolutely. It has glommed onto my brain and not let go.
And talk about a book that needs multiple book clubs to unpack.
Yeah, that's like this book.
Right. Okay, so this is a really hard, you're Helpless. We're going back to Helpless. It's a hard book to discuss without talking about the ending, but reminder to everyone who's watching, this is a no spoiler zone. So we're not going to talk about the ending, but let's start at the beginning. Faye's first instinct when she realized she's locked isn't really to panic. It's to wonder if this is something that she might have wanted for herself in some strange, weird way. So how did you decide to open the door like that? Like, what was that? Like, how did you make that decision?
Well, during the pandemic, actually, we were talking about the pandemic before we went live, and just kind of what a blur those years were. But I got really into the Court of Thorns and Roses series, like really helped me pass the time. And the first book in that, thank you so much. The first book in that series actually features a kidnapping. And the main character starts to fall for her kidnapper and develop feelings for him. And I was like, this is really sexy. And like, why is this sexy? And it just kind of activated something in me where I kept kind of looking for a story setup that featured that push and pull dynamic. That's romantic, but toxic, dangerous, and alluring, like all the components of something that is potentially really, really messy and interesting. And I went back into the archives. I read In the Cup by Susanna Moore, which definitely scratched the itch. And then I just couldn't find anything else. And I was like, with this one, I keep saying, like, I wrote the book I was trying to find and read myself, and I couldn't find it. I was like, I'm going to just like write my own. So that's kind of where the character, but I also liked the idea of Faye being someone who was, although control had been wrested from her, she was still like a little bit in control of it all. Like, I thought that was an interesting way to flip the script. When it comes to this sort of dominant, submissive kind of dynamic that we've seen before, where it's usually the male character leading the female character into it, and she's a little like, oh no, I don't know if I can do this. I wanted Faye to be like a little bit more deviant and like have a little more fun with it.
It works.
Yeah. I know. Well, and I guess this question kind of leads to that in a little ways, but Faye's built a career being the one who tells the story on the page and on the screen. And so I guess what you're exploring is what happens to a woman like that when she's no longer the one in control of the narrative. And so I guess you're saying you made it a point to let her also have control moments.
Yeah.
So she doesn't help.
Yeah, even though on the surface she appears helpless, like you have to keep reading to find out like why it's a little bit of like a tongue-in-cheek title.
Right. That's so good.
So Faye and Henry reunite. They end up in the same room again at a funeral, at a professor's funeral. Why did you set up their reunion in that, kind of a dark setting?
Yeah. So I'm sure you guys have read Galleys, but in the finished copy, my dedication is finally written, and it's dedicated to my former professor who passed away right before I started writing this novel. And I had actually returned to my college campus for to kind of take myself on a solo writing retreat. And I went to school in upstate New York, very small liberal arts school. And like Faye in the novel, I had a creative writing scholarship there. And so he was very instrumental in my kind of development as a writer, and in helping me with my career prospects too. And so that was kind of the inspiration for the event that would bring them back together. And I liked the idea, and I think this is a theme that is common in my debut novel, Luckiest Girl Alive. I love the tension between who we were and who we are now. And so the idea that when Faye and Henry were together in college, there was a power differential in Henry's favor because Faye was the scholarship kid and he came from money, and he had a family that had second and third homes, and he was always the one taking her places. And there's a line in the book where she says he was always driving the car, I didn't have anywhere to take him to. And so when they reunite over 10 years later, Faye is now a successful director, writer, and actress in Hollywood. And so she's bringing a different energy to the equation. And I just love that. I love that feeling of writing a character who was not on even footing with the people around her when she was younger, being thrust back into that environment, now eye to eye with these people that maybe she felt a little inferior to when she was younger.
Yeah. And also, kind of back in this relationship that left a mark, right, on her life. No amount of success, distance, and time could ever kind of erase for her. So what were you interested in exploring about those kinds of, love stories? It's a love story kind of, right? That like people never really
I keep saying it's a demented love story. Well, I think also there's something really interesting that we're seeing in just the kind of pop culture trends and reading trends, which is like this kind of rampant popularity of dark romance. But dark romance, if you think about it, is really just a modern iteration of the sexy supermarket paperbacks that I would try and grab in the checkout line when I was a teen, and the bodice rippers from the 70s. And so there's always been for a certain reader, enough readers out there, a draw to a story where a man has an aggressive presence, but there's something about him that you also can't resist, and that his desire for you is so all-consuming that there's just something, I think, that we don't get that in real life ever. And so there's this fantasy aspect to it, but it also feels very taboo. And that it's lived on, you know, for decades now. Like it just keeps finding a new home and new characters. And I think we're telling those stories a little bit more responsibly now, and like with a little more like thought and understanding about there's a real difference between what we fantasize about and like what we might find repulsive in real life, you know? And I wanted to explore that in this book. And I hope that the ending kind of nods to that like this is an exploration of like why we have these taboo fantasies.
Yeah.
It does, but in the middle of it, Henry's demands escalate the longer he's there. So how did you decide where the emotional and psychological limits of that relationship were?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's also a thriller. And so people end up dead, you know, crimes are covered up, deaths that you thought were accidental might not be. There might be a you know, more to the story. And I wanted the engine of a thriller behind, like always in the background of this, you know, of Faye and Henry's kind of push and pull together. So there's this like danger and mystery like surrounding them kind of at all times. And what is Henry withholding from Faye? And at what point does she discover certain things? And then how does that affect how she sees him and her attraction to him and her willingness to go there with him and kind of risk it all for him? So it was like, you know, and I love the erotic thrillers from like the 90s, you know, and I'm like, I haven't had like a good erotic thriller, it feels like, in a really long time. So I wanted to, you know, just, I don't know, explore that terrain. You know, it felt like something like new and fun and like really juicy.
Yeah.
Did you find yourself like going too far and having to rein yourself back in, or?
Yeah, well, because I've never really written straight, not that this is romance, but I've never really written like sex this graphically or like romance. And so that was like a little bit of a skill set I had to develop in the drafting process of this. So I definitely got very helpful feedback from my editor and from my book agent about like, this is hot, but this isn't, you know? And sometimes I'm sure you've all experienced this, you're just too close to the material to be able to tell.
And sex is hard to write. It really is.
It's really hard to write. And my hat is off to anyone who writes it successfully because it's not easy.
There's a lot of choreography.
There's a lot of choreography. And like choreography is not necessarily sexy.
Right.
So it's like, how do you paint a picture of what's going on without reducing it to like stage directions? Like that was always the challenge for me.
Yeah, I think it's really hard. I had like 2 years in romance writing, and I couldn't.
Did you?
But I couldn't write the sex scene, so I had to skedaddle out of there.
It's so much easier to write someone being murdered than it is sex.
Murdering so much easier. Yes.
So much easier. Yes.
Oh my God.
Well, when you talk about, you know, the mystery thriller aspect and that history that's kind of unearthed as we read the book, what came first for you? Was it the mystery thriller part, or was it this dark relationship between these two? Which came first for you?
It was the relationship. It was this idea that like, I think everyone can relate to an idea that like there's an ex or someone in your life who left a mark on you, that there was a chemistry and a connection that was not tenable, that was unhealthy, and you both knew it was unhealthy, but there was like a passion there that was a result almost of it being unhealthy. I think that's something so many people can relate to. And like, what would you do if you had the chance to reconnect with that person again with 12 years growth and wisdom? Like, would it be different? would you do things differently with one another? Would you say different things? Would you see the past differently? Like those were all, that was like really fertile ground for me to get into, because I just, those are questions I've asked myself years before I'd ever even had the idea to write this book.
Here's a question from Julie. Which character was the hardest to flesh out?
Definitely Henry, because I don't usually spend as much time worrying about making my male characters three-dimensional. Because I'm just like, I find it more challenging, because I don't know what it's like to be a man and go through life as a man. I can imagine it, but it's much, much easier for me to put myself in the mind of a female character, even if she's wildly different from me. Just the female experience is obviously so much more accessible to me. So really thinking about what Henry's background was, what his family history was, the regrets he has, the secrets he's keeping, that challenged me.
Yeah, and that would have been hard to write because he is keeping some secrets, right? And he looks like he's, he's this married father running the family business, but is he really the more settled of the two or not?
Right, exactly.
So good. Okay, so a lot of your readers come to your books for women who outsmart the people underestimating them. Without spoiling anything, is Faye that kind of a heroine, or were you after something messy this time?
I love that characterization. Yeah, I like a character that's like underestimated, and gets the chance to prove herself. So that was important to me, that Faye also have those qualities. But I also wanted to leave room for her to make mistakes and make choices that maybe I wouldn't make, maybe you wouldn't make, that maybe you'd be turning the pages like, what the hell are you thinking? What the hell are you doing? Because I don't always need my characters to be redeemable. You know what I mean? Or I just need them to have gone somewhere in their journey. So while Faye is a redeemable character to me, she might not be for everyone. And I think that's what makes a character really interesting, and like you want to talk about her and understand her more and keep reading to try and understand her more.
Yeah, which brings us the no spoiler part, of course. The only thing we're going to say about the ending is that book clubs will love the discussions, right? Did you have that in mind, like that this would be a great discussion for book clubs and friends arguing over their interpretation of the ending?
So I wasn't thinking about book clubs, that that kind of, what I wanted to create was that feeling of the rug being ripped out from underneath you and wanting to go back to the beginning and find the clues that you missed the first time. I love that experience as a thriller fan myself. So I really wanted to try and pull that off. And so I had this idea for what the twist was. And I wrote to that. And then when I turned it in, my editor was like, it's not working. Like I understand what you're trying to do, but the execution is not there. And so she was encouraging me to leave that behind. And I was like really resolute. I was like, no, I need to find a way to make this work. So I probably sat on it for like a couple of weeks. And then I had this other idea of how to kind of accomplish the feeling that I wanted to invoke. But the execution of it looked very, very different than what the original idea was. And thankfully she was like, yes, I love that. And then I wrote it and she was like, you landed the plane. And I was like, because like that I don't know if I could have let that one go. Like, I think I would have kept at it until I nailed what I was trying to go for, because I was just so dogged about this twist.
Isn't
Well,
that
I can attest. It is one of those endings. You get to it and you're like, wait a minute. And I flipped back. I read it a couple times. I'm like,
I
wait, what
love
did I miss? What is going on?
I know. I'm so glad to hear that because I love a book where like I read it and then I'm like, no, wait. And then I have to go and read it again. It's like
Exactly.
my favorite experience.
Yeah.
so good? Well, Jessica, we could talk all night about this, but it's time for our giveaway, your giveaway. So Jessica is giving away 10 copies of Helpless to lucky US viewers. It doesn't matter where you're watching. We scour the comments everywhere we stream, but please make sure to shout out where you're from when you answer this question. And this is a tough one to our audience. Do you read scary books in bed or only in broad daylight? So hard.
See,
So
there's no
answer
wrong
that
answers.
question, and you can be a winner of one of 10 copies of Helpless.
Yay. The Killers are big fans of independent booksellers and want to send them all the support. Jessica has chosen the Strand in Union Square, New York, as her bookstore tonight. Jessica, tell us why you love this bookstore so much.
I love the Strand so much. Every time I've done an event there, I just get the best turnout, the best conversations with readers. And I also just love the location in New York City. It's like right off Union Square. You can go in, it's huge. It's like 4 floors and you can just grab a coffee, browse for hours. Like it's just the coziest, even though it's like to have like a big location in New York City is like always a feat, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. Like it feels like you're in the store with like fellow book lovers and just whiling away like a wonderful afternoon. So
That's
big
great.
fan of the Strand. Yeah.
Yay. Okay, we'll
Yeah.
drop the link to the Strand in the comments for you guys so you can order Helpless and any other books on your list.
That's right. So writers of psychological suspense tend to read with a very particular eye, not just for pleasure, but for craft, inspiration, and occasionally permission to go even darker. Jessica, what's currently living on your killer bookshelf?
I love this book. Actually came out in 2025, but I just picked it up and read it over the last couple of months, and it's called The Death of Us by Abigail Dean. It's extraordinary. It is about a couple who becomes victims of a serial killer in London, and it's a serial killer that targets couples, and they survive, and the incident breaks apart their marriage. And so it's really like a postmortem of who they were before the attack and how the attack unraveled their relationship, and also while following the investigation of who the other victims are and finding the killer and ultimately bringing him to justice. It is so moving. I mean, it's gripping because it's a mystery that you're trying to solve, but it is so moving. It brought me to tears multiple times.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of fabulous books, we have 2 new releases to celebrate tonight. First, we have Library After Dark by Andy Pelego. A haunted library, a killer in the crowd, and one bookseller's secrets that refuse to stay buried in this gripping locked room thriller from the best-selling author of You Are Fatally Invited. And next we have A Botanist's Guide to Tradition and Treachery by Kate Cavarari. Brilliant botanist Savrin Everly has set sail on her first research expedition, but it's disrupted by accusations of murder when one of her fellow scientists is murdered in this daring 5th installment. So Andy is giving away 3 copies of The Library After Dark, and Kate is giving away 1 copy of The Botanist's Guide to Tradition and Treachery to US viewers. So you want in, make sure you tell us in the comments where you're from. And because we're all about shamelessly plugging our own murdery fun, don't miss the Killer's latest reads.
Kara's got We Were Never Friends, a sorority reunion that takes a very, very dark turn.
And speaking of deadly parties, Heather's serving up the perfect host, an over-the-top gender reveal party that explodes in more ways than one.
And Kimberly's taking you on a deadly European getaway to the canals of Amsterdam in the expat affair. And we want to say a big killer thanks to Book Reporter for sharing all the murdery love. So stay up to date on bookish news and events at bookreporter.com.
Jessica, you know what? We have great news for you. You have survived the Killer Author Club. And, you know, not everyone.
Twice.
Yes, you're. That tells you what big fans we are, by the way. Anyway, could you please tell us where our readers and viewers can find you online?
Yes, I'm really only active on Instagram these days, so you can find me at Jessica Knoll Author.
Perfect. That is easy.
All right, you guys, that is a wrap on tonight's episode. Thanks for hanging out with us. Tonight's show drops this Friday as a podcast with bonus content you won't hear here. So find the links to listen and download at killerauthorclub.com. And while you're there, make sure to check out our merch and sign up for our newsletter so you're the first to hear all the killer breaking news. Because in Thrillerland, first to know is first to survive. We will be back in 2 weeks on July 7th with Dervla McTiernan discussing 3 reasons for revenge. In the meantime,
trust no one,
question everything,
and keep turning the pages. Good night, killers.
Bye.
That does it for tonight's show. Thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to catch our next show live, we're every other Tuesday night on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. For times, upcoming schedule, and to catch up on past episodes, visit us at killerauthorclub.com. Happy reading. Now get on out there and kill that TBR.